The soup was still hot when Derek said it. We were all sitting at the round table, in Vivian's dining room, the one she bought 2 years ago, pale oak, too big for the space, the kind of furniture that announces itself. My daughter had made pho, or something close to it, the broth thin, where mine would have been heavy, the basil already wilting at the edges of the plate. I had said nothing about that. I was good at saying nothing about things. There were 4 of us. Vivian across from me, Derek at the head, his mother Mrs. Wynne beside him, a small, watchful woman who reminded me of a bird that had learned to keep very still near cats. I had always liked her for that. I had never told her so. The incense on the small shelf near the window was burning down to ash. I had brought it, sandalwood, the same kind I burn on my altar at home in front of my husband Min's photograph, the one from 1987 when his hair was still black and he was laughing at something off camera. The smoke moved in a slow thread toward the ceiling. I watched it for a moment before Derek began to speak. He didn't look at me directly. He looked at the space just beside my left shoulder, the way people do when they have prepared what they're going to say and they don't want your actual face to disrupt the delivery. "Mom," he said, "let's be honest." Vivian reached for her glass of water. "You're getting older. We all can see that. And that's not a bad thing. It's just reality." A pause, shaped and deliberate. "You don't need to be on the paperwork anymore. The apartment, the documents. It's just easier for everyone if we handle things ourselves now." Mrs. Nguyen set her chopsticks down very quietly. The basil on my plate had gone completely soft. I watched one leaf curl against the edge of the bowl, slow and certain, the way things that have been cut from their roots always eventually do. The ceiling fan overhead made its small, tired sound. Derek was still looking at that spot beside my shoulder, waiting. I smiled, not wide, not warm, just enough to close the conversation for him, to give him the face he needed to believe he had said something reasonable and been received well. 35 years as a head nurse teaches you that expression. You learn it in corridors outside rooms where hard news has just been delivered. You learn it when a patient's family needs to believe they have been heard before you redirect them toward the truth. The smile is not deception. It is patience wearing a face. Vivian did not look at me. She looked at her soup. Mrs. Nguyen looked at me. Her eyes said something her mouth would not. I gave her a small nod. The kind only another woman of a certain age can read. And she picked up her chopsticks again. I said, "Of course, Derek." My voice was even. "We'll talk more about this." He relaxed then, the particular relaxation of a man who believes he has won something and is already moving on inside his head to the next item. His shoulders dropped. He picked up his glass. Vivian finally looked at me, briefly, and her expression was complicated in a way I did not have the appetite to untangle at the dinner table. Not with the incense still burning, and Min's last photograph facing west in my apartment 3 kilometers away. We finished the meal. I helped clear the bowls. Mrs. Wynne touched my arm once in the kitchen, near the sink, when the water was running loud enough to cover it. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. I drove home alone. The night was warm, the kind of wet warmth that settles over the city in late August and makes everything feel slightly unresolved. Headlights moved across the overpass. A woman on a motorbike was transporting a tower of boxes strapped with yellow cord, balanced by habit and years, the way things only balance when you have carried them long enough to know their weight exactly. I had bought the apartment in 2019. Vivian and Derek had been married for 3 years, living in a rented flat near the industrial district, and Vivian had mentioned, once, in a passing, careful way, that they were hoping to find something more stable. She did not ask directly. Vivian has never asked for things directly in her life. She circles, she mentions. She places the idea in the room and leaves it there, the way you leave a window open and wait to see what kind of air comes through. I had said nothing at the time. I went home, sat at the kitchen table with the account book I have kept since 1991. Paper ledger, blue ink, my own handwriting across every column, and I looked at 35 years of salary from the hospital. The retirement sum, the savings I had not spent on anything particular because Min and I had lived simply, because we had believed there would be time. Min passed in 2016. After that, the money sat in the bank, and I sat in the apartment on Tran Hung Dao Street with his photograph and the sandalwood incense and the knowledge that money does not care whether you are grieving. It simply waits. I bought the apartment for Vivian in September 2019. Cash, the way my generation does things when we have finally saved enough to do them right. The closing was on a Thursday. I wore my gray Audi and brought the original documents home in a pale green folder I still have, tucked inside the tin box under the altar table, beneath Min's photograph, beneath the sandalwood ash. The title deed has my name on it. Every line of the closing documents has my name on it. The bank records show the transfer from my account. My account. The one Derek has apparently decided is too complicated for a woman of my age to understand. I parked in the alley behind my building and sat in the car for a moment before going up. The city made its usual sounds, a radio somewhere, rain beginning on the corrugated roofs 2 buildings over, small and preliminary, not yet sure of itself. I thought of something my mother used to say when she was shelling beans on the front step of our house in the north, the words moving as slow and steady as her hands. Still water, she would say, runs deepest. She meant it as a warning to people who confused silence for emptiness. They had misread my silence for 35 years. I picked up my bag and went inside. Min used to wake before the city did. I would hear him in the kitchen, the particular sound of the gas burner catching, the small clink of the kettle setting onto the grate. He made his tea the same way every morning for 31 years, loose leaf in a glass cup, no sugar, steeped until the water turned the color of old amber. He would stand at the window with that cup and watch the alley below come to life. The noodle vendor with her coal cart, the man who repaired motorbikes and arrived always at 5:45, never earlier, never later. Min watched them the way some men watch the news with attention, with a kind of quiet respect for the persistence of ordinary things. I was a light sleeper then. Still am. 35 years of night shifts leaves a mark on how you rest. I would lie in bed listening to him move through the apartment and feel, in a way I could not have explained to anyone under 40, completely at peace. We had lived on Tran Hung Dao Street since 1994. The apartment was on the 3rd floor of a building that had been repainted so many times the walls near the stairwell had developed a texture like old cake. 2 bedrooms. A kitchen with 1 window that faced the alley. A living room where we put the altar table after Min's father passed in 1998, and where it has remained ever since, acquiring its objects slowly, the way important things do, his father's photograph first, then his mother's in 2004, then Min's own in 2016, positioned in the center where I placed it the evening after the funeral when I came home and did not know what else to do with my hands. Min had worked as an engineer at a water management office for most of his career. He was precise about things, measurements, schedules, the correct torque for a particular bolt. He kept his tools in a wooden tray in the 2nd bedroom, and every Sunday evening he would spend 20 minutes cleaning them, not because they were dirty, but because he believed things lasted longer when you paid attention to them. He applied that same logic to everything. To the apartment. To our routines, to me. When I came home from a long shift, the ones that ran 16 hours, the ones where someone had not made it and I had held a stranger's hand and counted the minutes until I could give the family the news they already knew, Min would have soup waiting. Not elaborate. Usually rice porridge with ginger, simple and hot, the kind of food that does not ask you to have an opinion about it. He would set it on the table and sit across from me while I ate, and he would not ask how it had gone. He understood that some nights the answer lived in the body and not the mouth, and that soup was more useful than questions. I loved him for that specifically. Among many things, but that specifically. Vivian was born in 1988, our only child. A fact we had not planned but had arranged ourselves around so completely that the apartment felt correctly sized, not cramped, not hollow, just right. She was a quiet child, watchful the way both her parents were watchful, but her silences had a different quality than mine. Mine come from patience. Hers, even then, came from something more internal, more undecided, as though she were always running 2 versions of a conversation in her head before choosing which one to offer the room. She was good in school, studied design in Hanoi. Came back at 26 with a portfolio and opinions about furniture and a restlessness I recognized but could not fix. She met Derek 2 years later at a colleague's wedding. He was confident in the way of men who have learned to perform confidence and have not yet been tested. I did not say that to Min at the time. I said he seemed capable. Min died in February 2016. His heart, which the doctors had been watching for 3 years, finally did what they had been watching for. He was 62. He had been planning a trip to Hugh the following April. We had talked about it at New Year. The kind of conversation where you agree on something future and feel briefly like the future is a settled matter. He did not make it to April. The apartment after his passing was the same apartment in every physical sense. Same walls, same altar table, same window above the alley where I sometimes stood with coffee in the mornings and watched the motorbike repairman arrive at 5:45. Same wooden tray of tools in the second bedroom, which I did not move for 8 months because I could not decide what moving it would mean. But it was also entirely different. A space can hold absence the way it holds furniture, not as an absence of something, but as a presence of its own. I learned to move around it. I worked 2 more years after Min died, through 2018, and then I retired. 35 years in the hospital, the last 11 as head nurse of the surgical recovery ward. My retirement party was held in the canteen on a Thursday afternoon. Someone had ordered a fruitcake. My supervisor, Dr. Ha, gave a speech that was generous and slightly too long, and several of the younger nurses I had trained over the years were in the room, which meant more to me than the cake or the speech. I came home that evening and sat at the altar table for a while. The incense was burning low. I told Min I was done now. I told him I had paid attention to things, the way he would have wanted. In 2019, when Vivian circled around the idea of needing somewhere more stable, I sat with my account book at this same table, with the incense ash collecting in the small brass bowl, and I made a decision, a mother's decision, a practical one, or so I believed. I bought the apartment in September. I attended the closing alone, signed my name in 11 places, and brought the folder home in my canvas bag with my umbrella and a packet of sesame crackers I had bought at the corner shop and eaten on the walk back to my car. The original title deed went into the tin box that evening, the box that had belonged to Min's mother, pale green metal, a small latch on the front, a faint dent on the left corner from some move or moment I was never told about. I set the deed inside, folded once along a crease I made myself, and put the box on the lower shelf of the altar table, beneath the incense holder, beneath Min's photograph. I thought that was the end of it. A decision made and filed away properly, the way you file a patient's chart when treatment is complete and everything has resolved as expected. I did not yet know that Derek had been watching my habits for considerably longer than I had been watching his. The first letter came on a Tuesday. I know it was a Tuesday because I had been to the market that morning, the covered one on Leloy Street, where the woman who sells dried mushrooms has known my face for 11 years and always sets aside the thick ones before I arrive. I came home with mushrooms and a small bag of star anise and a packet of rice paper I did not need but bought anyway. The way you buy things when the morning has been pleasant and you are not yet ready for it to end. The envelope was in my mailbox at the base of the stairs. Plain white. No return address. My name in print that was too even to be handwritten, a label, the kind produced by a machine. I stood in the dim light of the ground floor hallway and looked at it for a moment before opening it. It was a notice from the building management office of the apartment I had purchased for Vivian on Nguyen Thi Minh Khai Street. A routine communication, the header said, regarding updated contact information on file for Unit 7B. I read it twice. The contact name on their records had been changed. The phone number and email address associated with the unit owner had been updated to a number I did not recognize, and an email address that was not mine. The change had been processed, the letter said, on the 14th of the previous month, 31 days ago, a month in which I had received no communication from the building at all, no notices, no reminders, no quarterly maintenance summary, because anything sent to that unit had been going to someone else's phone, someone else's inbox. I stood in the hallway until a neighbor came down the stairs and nodded at me on her way to the door. I nodded back. I folded the letter along its original crease and put it in my bag, next to the dried mushrooms. Upstairs, I set everything on the kitchen counter and did not unpack it. I sat at the table and read the letter a third time, then I read it once more. The change of contact had been submitted in writing, the notice explained, by an authorized representative of the unit's occupants. Authorized representative. I turned the phrase over in my mind, the way you turn something over in your hands when you are trying to understand what it is made of. I had not authorized any representative. I had not requested any change. The only document I had ever signed that bore anything resembling that language was the power of attorney Vivian had brought to the apartment 8 months ago. The papers spread across my kitchen table on a Sunday afternoon when I had been awake since 4 in the morning after a poor night. The ceiling fan turning overhead, Vivian explaining in her circling way that it would just make things easier, just for managing small administrative things, just so she and Derek could help more, just in case. I had signed it. I had read it first, or I had believed I was reading it. My glasses were on the table, and I had not reached for them because I did not want Vivian to see me squinting at documents. She had already explained. Because there are moments between a mother and a daughter when pride steps in ahead of caution and does not announce itself. I went to the second bedroom, the one I had kept as a quiet room after Min's tools were finally moved, and I opened the drawer in the small cabinet where I keep papers. The power of attorney was in a manila envelope folded once. I brought it to the kitchen table and put on my glasses and read it completely, every line, every clause, the way I should have read it on that Sunday 8 months ago. The document authorized Vivian to act on my behalf for administrative and financial matters relating to properties held in my name. The language was standard. What was not standard was a secondary clause near the bottom of the second page, small fonted, positioned after a paragraph about banking notifications, a clause that extended authority to Vivian's spouse in her absence. Derek, authorized to act on her behalf, which meant, by chain, authorized to act on mine. I set the document flat on the table. The star anise in my shopping bag was filling the kitchen with its faint licorice smell, sweet and slightly medicinal. The ceiling fan moved slowly. I thought about the Sunday Vivian had brought those papers. I thought about Derek sitting at the far end of my sofa with his phone, not looking at us, apparently occupied, apparently uninvolved. I remembered thinking that it was considerate of him not to hover while Vivian and I handled paperwork. I had interpreted his distance as tact. I called the building management office and asked to speak with someone who could explain the contact change on record for Unit 7B. I was on hold for 4 minutes. The woman who came on the line was polite and careful. She confirmed that a written request had been submitted by a Mr. Derek Nguyen, described as authorized agent for the unit owner. The change had been processed per standard procedure. She said she was sorry for any confusion and asked if I would like to resubmit my own contact information. Yes, I said, I would. I gave them my phone number and my email address and my name Margaret Lanveau, original purchaser, name on the title deed, no other name on the title deed, and the woman read back each piece of information and confirmed it had been updated. She told me I would receive a confirmation message. I thanked her and ended the call. I sat for a while in the quiet apartment. The confirmation message arrived 7 minutes later. I read it, then set the phone face down on the table. 31 days. For 31 days, any official communication from the building, notices, financial statements, any alert about the unit had been routed to Derek's contact information without my knowledge. I did not yet know what he had done with that access. I did not know what had arrived in that month, what he had received, what he had responded to, what he had initiated under the invisible authority of a clause I had not read carefully on a Sunday morning when I was tired and my glasses were on the table. What I knew was this: a man who had sat on my sofa appearing not to pay attention had been paying very close attention indeed. I got up and went to the altar table in the living room. The sandalwood incense had burned to the end of its stick. I replaced it with a new one, lit it, and stood for a moment in the thin curl of smoke while Min's photograph watched from the center of the shelf. I did not speak to him. I simply stood there and let the smoke move. Then I went back to the kitchen and opened my account book, the blue-inked ledger I had kept since 1991, and I turned to the pages from 2019 and I began to read every entry from September forward, slowly, the way you read a patient's chart when something in the room has shifted and you cannot yet name what it is, but you know, with the particular certainty of long experience, that something has. I did not sleep well that night. This was not unusual in itself. Since Min passed, sleep had become a negotiation rather than a certainty, some nights cooperative, others not. But that night the wakefulness had a different quality. Not grief, not the ordinary restlessness of an aging body. Something more like the feeling I used to have in the surgical recovery ward when a patient's chart looked technically normal, but the room felt wrong in some way I could not document. Nurses learned to take that feeling seriously. I had learned that 40 years ago and I had never unlearned it. I got up at 4:30 and made tea. I sat at the kitchen table with my account book open to the 2019 entries, and my reading glasses on properly this time. I read the September figures again. The transfer to the developer's escrow account, the full purchase amount, drawn from the savings account I had held at Vietcombank since 1986. The closing costs, itemized. The registration fees, every figure matched what I remembered. What I had paid clearly and completely, and the records said so in my own blue ink. What the account book could not tell me was what had happened in the 14 months since Derek changed the contact information. What notices had arrived. What he had read. What he had answered. At 6 in the morning, I called attorney Thomas Pham. I had used Thomas twice before, once in 2015 when a boundary dispute arose with the owner of the unit below mine on Tran Hung Dao Street, and once in 2018 to update my will after Min died. He was methodical, not fast, but the kind of methodical that produces correct results rather than merely prompt ones. He answered on the second ring, which told me he was already at his desk. I explained the situation in the order it had occurred. The dinner. Derek's remark about the paperwork. The building management letter. The power of attorney clause I had not read carefully. The 31 days of redirected contact. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. "Do you have the original title deed accessible?" he asked. "In my apartment." "Yes. Don't move it. Don't send copies to anyone." A pause. "Mrs. Vo, I'd like to run a title search on the property. Standard procedure, current ownership status as recorded with the land registry. Can you give me the unit address and the cadastral reference number from your closing documents?" I had the closing folder on the table beside my account book. I read him the numbers. "I'll have something for you by end of day," he said, "possibly sooner. Stay near your phone." I thanked him and set the phone down. The morning was already bright through the kitchen window, the alley below beginning its usual accumulation of sound and motion. A woman was hosing down the pavement in front of the noodle shop. A delivery driver was arguing pleasantly with someone on his phone. Two cats were conducting a slow territorial negotiation near the drainpipe. Everything outside was proceeding exactly as it always did, indifferent to the particular quality of the morning I was having. I put the account book and the closing folder into the tin box, the one from Min's mother, pale green, the small brass latch, and I placed it on the altar table beside the incense holder, instead of on the lower shelf. Closer to the surface, easier to reach. I was not certain why I did this. Old habit, perhaps, the nursing instinct to keep critical documents within arm's reach when circumstances are developing in an unknown direction. I spent the morning doing ordinary things. I cleaned the kitchen. I repotted a small jasmine plant on the balcony that had been looking ill-considered in its current container for several months. I ate rice and leftover broth at noon and washed the bowl immediately after. Thomas called at 2:45. His voice was careful in the specific way of a professional delivering information that requires the listener to sit down, though he did not say that. I was already sitting. "The title search came back," he said. "The property at Unit 7B, Unwin Thi Min Kai, is currently recorded under the ownership of a limited liability company registered in Ho Chi Minh City. The registration is dated 11 months ago." I did not say anything. "The LLC was registered to a single director," Thomas continued. "The name on the registration is Derek Nguyen." The jasmine on the balcony moved in a small wind that came through the open door. I could smell it faintly from where I was sitting, the thin, clean smell of white flowers that bloom best in the dark. "The transfer was executed using a power of attorney document," Thomas said. "The grantor named on the transfer record is Margaret Lanvo, my name. Used to transfer the property I had purchased with 35 years of wages to a company that belonged entirely to my son-in-law and that had not existed, as far as I knew, before the 14th of the month in which Derek had changed the building's contact records. Was Vivian listed anywhere on the LLC registration?" I asked. A brief pause that was itself an answer before the words. "No," Thomas said. "She is not listed." I held the phone and looked at the altar table across the room. Min's photograph. The tin box on the shelf. The incense ash in the brass bowl. accumulated from this morning's stick, and the one before it, and the one before that. How did the transfer pass through the registry? I asked. The power of attorney, its scope. That's exactly the question, Thomas said. The document you signed authorized Vivian to act on your behalf for administrative and financial matters. Whether that language covers a full property transfer is contestable. The registry clerk apparently accepted it. But acceptance at that level doesn't mean it was correctly applied. If the scope of the authorization was exceeded, and I believe it was, the transfer is voidable. Voidable, I said, not automatically void. Not automatically. It requires challenge. It requires the original deed, the original closing documents, and a clear record of purchase in your name. A pause. Mrs. Vo, do you still have the original deed? I looked at the tin box on the altar shelf. The pale green metal. The small brass latch. The faint dent on the left corner. Yes, I said, I have it. Good. His voice settled into the quiet firmness I recognized from our previous work together. Then I need to tell you one more thing that came up in the search. The LLC registered to Derek 11 months ago. It took out a secured loan against the property. A second mortgage. A pause. The loan amount was recorded at 870 million dong. I sat with that number in the silence of my kitchen, the jasmine moving on the balcony, the city going about its afternoon outside the window, and I understood for the first time the full dimension of what had been built quietly around me while I was buying dried mushrooms and repotting plants and sitting at the altar table, not asking enough questions. Thomas, I said, I need you to find out where that money went. What he told me next made the jasmine smell go flat. The money had gone to a property developer in Bin Duong province. Thomas gave me the details in the flat, careful tone he used when the facts were serious enough to not require additional weight. A company called Min Fat Construction and Development, registered address in Thu Dao Mot, incorporated 4 years ago. The loan secured against my apartment, 870 million dong, had been transferred to Min Fat in 2 installments. The first, 600 million, 11 months ago, 3 weeks after the LLC was registered in Derek's name. The second, 270 million, 6 months after that. What is Min Fat? I asked. A mid-tier developer. Residential projects, mostly outer districts. A pause. They have a record of accepting private investment for pre-construction phases. High return potential, high risk. The kind of arrangement that doesn't always produce documentation a court would find satisfying. An investment, I said. That appears to be what Derek characterized it as. Yes. I set my tea down. The cup was cold. I had not noticed it going cold. Is there any record of return on that investment? None that I can locate through public filings. Thomas's voice was measured. Mrs. Vo. This kind of arrangement, private funds moved into a pre-construction vehicle through an LLC. If Min Fat underperforms or restructures, the money is very difficult to recover. It is not secured against anything you hold. It is secured against the apartment. Which means if the LLC defaults on the mortgage, the apartment is the collateral. I looked at the tin box on the altar shelf. The original deed inside it, folded along the crease I had made myself the September evening I brought it home from the closing. He borrowed against my apartment to invest in a construction company, I said. Not a question. Just the fact, laid flat where I could see all of it at once. That is what the documents indicate. Without my knowledge. Without your knowledge or consent, using a power of attorney that, in my reading, did not extend to encumbering the property with new debt. I was quiet for a moment. Through the open balcony door, the city made its afternoon sounds: a motorbike, a vendor's call, the thin music from a radio in the building across the alley. All of it continuing, undisturbed, the way the world continues when something inside a single apartment has shifted completely. Does Vivian know? I asked. A pause that lasted 2 seconds longer than his other pauses. I can't determine that from the documents. Her name appears nowhere in the LLC filing or the loan agreement, but absence from a document doesn't establish absence of knowledge. I thanked him and told him I would call in the morning. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time after. I thought about Vivian at dinner the night Derek had spoken about the paperwork. The way she had reached for her water glass, The way she had not looked at me when I smiled. I had read her silence that night, as discomfort, a daughter caught between a husband and a mother, wanting to be nowhere near the conversation. I had allowed that reading because it was more bearable than the other one. I was not certain anymore which reading was correct. I was not certain Vivian herself knew which one was correct. The following morning I went to the apartment on Nguyen Thi Minh Khai Street. I had a key. I had always had a key, the original, cut at the hardware shop near my building the week after the closing in 2019. Kept on a small ring with the tag I had written myself in blue ink. Unit 7B. The lock had not been changed. I noted that. Either Derek had not thought to change it, or he had thought to change it and decided that doing so would alert me to something he was not ready for me to know. The apartment was tidy in the surface way of a space where someone manages appearances without caring about the space itself. Vivian's design work visible in the choices, a textured throw on the sofa, a row of plants on the windowsill, a print on the wall that was tasteful and said nothing. The kitchen clean, dishes put away, the second bedroom set up as a home office, a desk with 2 monitors, filing trays, a row of binders on a shelf above. I stood in the doorway of the office and looked at the binders without touching them. Then I went to the desk. I was not searching. I want to be precise about that. I was not rifling through drawers or reading private correspondence. I was looking at what was already visible, already left on the surface of a desk in a room in an apartment that had my name on the title deed. The desk held a closed laptop, a phone charger coiled beside it, a ceramic cup holding pens. On the left side, a tray with 2 documents set face up, not filed, not put away, left in the way of papers that have been recently consulted and not yet returned to their folder. The top document was a letter. Letterhead from a legal firm I did not recognize. Dated 9 days ago. I read the first paragraph. Then I read it again. The letter was addressed to Derek Nguyen as director of the LLC. It referenced the loan agreement secured against Unit 7B and a clause. I had not heard Thomas mention a clause allowing the lender to accelerate full repayment if the underlying asset's ownership status was successfully challenged. The letter was informing Derek that a title query had been logged with the land registry for the property in question. Thomas's title search, filed in my name, 2 days before this letter was dated. Derek already knew I had started looking. I set the letter down exactly as I had found it, face up, position unchanged. My hands were steady. I had worked 35 years in surgical recovery. My hands had always been steady when they most needed to be. I left the apartment, locked the door behind me, and went down to the street. My car was parked half a block away under a flame tree that was dropping its red petals onto the pavement in the windless afternoon heat. I sat in the driver's seat and did not start the engine for several minutes. Derek knew about the title query, which meant he knew I had an attorney, which meant whatever move he was planning to make, whatever the next step was in an arrangement that had already transferred my property, mortgaged it, and moved the proceeds into an investment I had never agreed to, he would now be planning it faster. I thought about what Thomas had said. Voidable, not automatically void. The original deed, the original closing documents, the bank records showing my name, my account, my money. Everything I needed was in the tin box on the altar shelf. I started the engine. I was 2 blocks from home when my phone rang. The screen showed Vivian's name. He let it ring. It rang again 30 seconds later. Then a third time. Then, after a silence of almost 4 minutes, a message arrived. I read it at the next red light, the flame tree petals still caught in my windshield wipers, the afternoon heat pressing against the glass. The message was 4 words. Mom. He found the box. I did not call Vivian back. I parked in the alley behind my building, turned off the engine, and sat with the phone in my hand until the screen went dark. 4 words. Mom. He found the box. I read them again when the screen lit up with another message, then another, then a call that I declined with the side button, the way you close a door quietly when you do not want the person on the other side to hear the latch. There were 2 possibilities. Either Vivian was warning me because she was afraid of what Derek would do next, or Derek had sent the message himself, using Vivian's phone, to see how I would react, what I would do, where I would go, whether I would panic and move the documents somewhere he could more easily locate. I had learned, over a long career in rooms where information meant the difference between correct action and catastrophic error, that when 2 possibilities exist and you cannot yet determine which is true, You proceed as though both are true simultaneously. You do not commit to an interpretation before the evidence supports it. I went upstairs. The tin box was on the altar shelf exactly where I had left it that morning, the pale green metal catching the late afternoon light through the window, the small brass latch closed. I stood in front of the altar for a moment and looked at it. Minge photograph behind it, the incense ash in the brass bowl, the end of the morning stick, everything undisturbed. The box had not been moved. I picked it up and held it and felt the weight of what was inside the original title deed, the closing documents, the bank transfer records, folded along their own creases, the same documents they had always been. Then I went to the second bedroom and opened the cabinet and removed the false bottom of the lower drawer, a piece of plywood Min had fitted there in 1998 for reasons he never fully explained, something about keeping important papers away from damp. Below it, a shallow space, just deep enough. I placed the tin box there and fitted the plywood back into position. Then I put 2 old phone directories on top of the plywood, the way they had always sat, and closed the drawer. 4 words could mean many things. But the original documents were now under 2 phone directories and a piece of plywood, and no one who did not already know about Min's particular carpentry habits would find them on a casual search. The following morning I was at Thomas Pham's office by 9. He had the title documents spread across his desk when I arrived, printouts from the land registry, the LLC registration, the mortgage agreement. He had worked through the evening, which I could see from the slight, careful quality of his movements, a man running on less sleep than usual but not willing to let it show in his work. He confirmed what I already knew. And then he told me the part I did not know yet. The power of attorney I had signed, the one with the clause extending authority to Derek in Vivian's absence, had been drafted by a legal firm called Hoang and Associates, a small practice in District 3, not Thomas's firm, not anyone I had ever engaged. The document had been prepared for Derek's use specifically, Thomas believed, before Vivian ever brought it to my kitchen table. He drafted it in advance, I said. The formatting and clause structure match Hoang and Associates' standard templates from that period. The document Vivian presented to you was not something Derek produced that week. It was prepared and waiting. I thought about Vivian at my kitchen table on that Sunday, her voice circling around the explanation, just to help, just in case. The papers already spread out when I sat down. Derek on the sofa, apparently not paying attention. The document had been ready before the visit. The visit had been the delivery mechanism. Can the transfer be challenged? I asked. Yes, on 2 grounds. Thomas set his pen down. First, the power of attorney's scope. A general administrative authorization does not, under current land law, extend to transferring ownership of real property. The registry clerk should not have accepted it. That is our primary argument. He paused. Second, there is the question of the mortgage. Even if the transfer were somehow deemed valid, Derek encumbered the property without the original owner's consent. That is a separate violation. Which argument is stronger? The first, clean, direct, supported by the original deed in your name and the bank records showing purchase funds from your account. He looked at me steadily. I want to file a formal challenge with the land registry and simultaneously petition the court for a temporary freeze on any further transactions involving the property. To do that, I need certified copies of the original deed and closing documents. I have them, I said. I'll need them by end of week. I told him he would have them by Thursday. I left his office and drove to the Vietcombank branch where I had held my savings account since 1986. The same branch, the same building on Hai Ba Trung Street, though the interior had been renovated twice since the first time I walked through the door as a 28-year-old nurse depositing her 3rd month's salary. The branch manager, a woman named Miss Lon, younger than Vivian, efficient, with the careful manner of someone who takes her responsibilities seriously, listened to my request and produced certified transaction records from September 2019 within 40 minutes. The full purchase transfer, clearly dated, clearly sourced from my personal account, bearing my name and identification number on every page. I thanked her and put the documents in my bag beside the closing folder. On the way back to my car, I stopped at the small copy shop 2 doors down from the bank, the one I had been using since 2007, run by a man named Mr. Hyo, who was 63, and had the organized stillness of someone who had spent 4 decades handling other people's important papers without once misplacing any of them. I asked for certified photocopies of everything in the folder, 3 sets, each page stamped and dated. Mr. Hugh did not ask what the documents were for. He never did. That was why I had been using his shop since 2007. 40 minutes later, I was back in my car with 3 certified copy sets in separate envelopes. The originals back in the folder in my bag. 1 set for Thomas. 1 set to be held at the bank in my safe deposit box, which I had not used in several years but which I reactivated that afternoon on the way home. 1 set for myself, stored separately from the originals. It was nearly 4 o'clock when I got back to my apartment. I made tea and sat at the kitchen table and permitted myself, for the first time in several days, something close to steadiness. My mother had said it about still water, but she had also said something else, on the mornings when she was shelling beans, and there was more on her mind than she was willing to name directly. She said that a woman who knows where her documents are kept will never be lost, no matter how many people try to move her furniture while she is sleeping. I had always kept my documents. I was finishing my tea when Thomas called. His voice had a new note in it, not alarm, but the focused quality of a man who has just found something he needs to act on immediately. "Mrs. Vo," he said. "I've been reviewing the LLC registration more carefully. The incorporation date is 11 months ago, as we established." A pause. "But I found a secondary filing attached to the same company registration, a document that was added 4 months after incorporation." "What kind of document?" "A transfer of membership interest," he said. 60% of the LLC was transferred to a third party 4 months after Derek registered it. I set my cup down. Who was the third party? The name Thomas gave me was not Derek's name. It was not Vivian's name. It was not any name I had ever heard connected to my family in any context. It was the name of Derek's business partner from a failed construction project in 2021. A man, Thomas, had spent the afternoon tracing through 3 separate company registrations, who also happened to be, according to the court records Thomas had found in the same search, currently under civil investigation for real estate fraud in 2 other districts. Derek had transferred majority ownership of the LLC holding my apartment to a man who was already under investigation for fraud, and he had done it 4 months after the transfer, which meant the mortgage on my apartment, the 870 million dong, had been taken out not by Derek alone, but with the full involvement of a man whose name I did not know, and whose intentions I could not yet measure. I had thought I was dealing with a son-in-law who had become greedy. I had not yet understood the full size of what I was standing inside. The letter arrived on a Thursday, delivered by a courier who asked for my signature on a handheld device, and was back on his motorbike before I had finished reading the first paragraph. It was from Hoang and Associates, Derek's lawyers. The language was formal and unhurried, the kind of legal prose that has been written to sound reasonable while doing something that is not. It informed me that as the registered owner of the LLC currently holding Unit 7B, Nguyen Thi Minh Khai Street, Mr. Derek Nguyen wished to resolve any confusion regarding the property's ownership status in a manner that was amicable and efficient for all parties. It noted that a review of the original power of attorney, a copy of which was attached, confirmed that the transfer of property had been executed within the scope of authority granted by the document's signatory, Mrs. Margaret Lan Vo. It expressed hope that Mrs. Vo would recognize the validity of the arrangement and decline to pursue further legal action, which would only result in unnecessary expense and delay for everyone involved. The final paragraph informed me that should I choose not to withdraw the title challenge filed with the land registry, Mr. Nguyen's legal team would be filing a counter-petition within 10 business days, accompanied by a formal request that the original power of attorney be upheld as sufficient authorization for all transactions conducted under its terms. Attached to the letter was a copy of the power of attorney. Not the version I had signed. A version with one additional line in the section on real property, a line I had never seen before, a line that stated clearly that the authorization extended to the transfer of any and all real property held in the grantor's name. I read that line 4 times. Then I photographed the document with my phone and sent it to Thomas before I had taken my coat off. His reply came in 11 minutes. "Call me now." I called. "It's been altered," he said, Without waiting for me to speak, the original you showed me last week does not contain that clause. This version has been modified. Can we prove that? Forensic document analysis. The font spacing on that line is marginally inconsistent with the rest of the page visible if you know what to look for. More importantly, I have your original, which does not contain it, and I have the timestamp from our first meeting when you showed it to me. A pause. They're escalating because the title challenge spooked them. The third-party partner, the fraud investigation they needed to move before the registry examiner started asking questions. What do I do? Nothing public. Not yet. His voice was steady. Let them file the counter-petition. We respond with the original document and a forensic report. Let the difference speak for itself in front of an examiner rather than in a letter. I agreed and ended the call. I made tea, though I did not drink it. I stood at the kitchen window and looked at the alley below and thought about the line that had not been in the document I signed. Someone had typed it, formatted it to match the surrounding text as closely as possible, reprinted the page, and reattached it to the document. Someone with access to the original file and enough composure to alter it without changing anything else. Derek. Or someone he had paid to do it. Either way, the document that would be filed with the court in 10 business days would not be the document I had signed at my kitchen table. It would be something else wearing the same face. 3 days later, without any message to warn me, Derek came to my apartment. I heard the knock at 11 in the morning. I was at the table reviewing the certified bank records Thomas had returned to me after making his own copies. I recognized the knock, not Vivian's, which was light and slightly hesitant, always 2 taps, always waiting. This was 4 knocks, evenly spaced, the knock of a man who expects the door to open. I put the documents in the cabinet drawer and went to the door. He was wearing a pale blue shirt, well pressed, his work clothes, not a weekend visit. A deliberate stop, timed during hours when he would normally be at the office, which meant he had come here specifically, mid-week, mid-morning, and wanted me to notice that he had taken time from his day to do so. He was carrying nothing. He smiled when I opened the door, the particular smile of a man who believes the territory is already his. I thought we should talk, he said, just us. I stood in the doorway. I did not invite him in. Where is Vivian? I asked. She has a client meeting. He said it easily, without hesitation. She doesn't need to be part of this conversation. I looked at him for a moment. He was 38 years old, broad-shouldered, with the kind of surface confidence that comes from years of watching other people defer to him. He had been a real estate agent for 12 years. He knew how to read a room, how to position himself, when to advance, and when to appear to retreat while actually advancing. He had been very good at it with me, for years, and I had allowed that. All right, I said. I stepped back from the door. He came in and stood in the living room without being invited to sit. He looked around the altar table, the plants on the windowsill, the cabinet in the corner with the assessing look of a man taking inventory. He had stood in this room before, many times. He had never looked at it this way before. Or perhaps he had always looked at it this way and I had not been watching his eyes carefully enough. You filed a challenge with the land registry, he said. His voice had lost the softness of the doorway. I want you to withdraw it. I sat down in the chair by the window. I did not offer him a seat. The apartment is legally held in a registered company, he continued. The transfer was authorized by a document you signed. I've had our lawyers review it thoroughly. He paused to let that land. If you continue the challenge, it goes to court. That takes months. It costs money. And at the end of it, the registry examiner looks at the signed power of attorney and tells you the transfer was valid. Another pause. You're an elderly woman living alone. This isn't a fight you can win. I looked at him. The morning light from the window fell across the room between us. The incense on the altar shelf was unlit, the brass bowl holding cold ash. Min's photograph behind it. Derek, I said, would you like tea? He blinked. The question had not fit the shape of the conversation he had prepared. He recovered quickly. He was good at that and shook his head once. I'm not here for tea. I know, I said. He looked at me with the specific expression of a man who has delivered a speech he expected to end a conversation and found it has not ended anything. Then, he looked at the cabinet in the corner. Then, at the altar shelf, His gaze moved around the room with a new attention, and I understood he was looking for something. Looking to see where I might keep documents. Where a tin box might be stored. He did not look at the second bedroom. He did not know about the drawer. He did not know about the plywood or the shallow space beneath it, or Min's particular carpentry habits from 1998. I need your answer this week, he said. Withdraw the challenge, and we settle this quietly. That's better for everyone, including Vivian. He let Vivian's name sit in the air between us, waited, the implication clear. Do this for your daughter. Make the trouble stop. Then he walked to the door, opened it himself, and left without saying goodbye. I sat in the quiet room for a moment, after his footsteps faded down the stairs. The altar shelf. Min's photograph. The cold ash in the brass bowl. He had come to my apartment in the middle of a workday and stood in my living room and told me I was an elderly woman living alone who could not win. He had used my daughter's name as a closing argument. He had looked at my shelves and my cabinet while he was speaking, and he had left without once asking whether Thomas Pham had already filed the forensic document analysis with the land registry that morning. He had not known to ask. He did not know that he was already 12 hours too late. Thomas called on a Friday morning, and I knew from the first second of silence before he spoke that what he had found was the kind of thing that changes the shape of everything that came before it. I need you to come to my office, he said. Today, if possible. I was there by 10. He had a folder on his desk, thicker than the ones before it. He did not open it immediately. He looked at me the way doctors look at patients before delivering results, not unkindly, but with the particular steadiness of someone who has prepared themselves to watch another person receive difficult news. I went back through the LLC filings, he said. All of them, including the secondary documents attached at incorporation. There was a management agreement buried in the annexures, 73 pages of incorporation materials. This was on page 61. He opened the folder and turned it to face me. I want you to read the highlighted section. I put on my reading glasses. The management agreement established Derek as operating director of the LLC for an initial term of 3 years, standard enough. But the highlighted section, 4 paragraphs down, concerned the source of the initial capital contributed to the LLC at incorporation. The amount listed was 220 million dong. Not borrowed. Contributed directly, as founding capital. The source was listed as a personal gift from a family member, documented by a signed declaration attached to the filing. The declaration was signed by Vivian. I read it twice. Then I set my glasses on the desk and looked at the wall behind Thomas for a moment. A framed certificate. A small clock. An ordinary office wall. She declared the money was her own personal gift, Thomas said quietly. 220 million dong contributed to Derek's LLC as founding capital. But that amount matches almost exactly the balance of a savings account I traced through the bank records you provided. He turned another page. Mrs. Vo, that savings account was opened in Vivian's name in 2020. The deposit that funded it, the single initial deposit, was transferred from your account in March 2020. I remembered March 2020. Vivian had called and said she needed help. Not with the apartment. That had already been purchased. She said she wanted to save, wanted to be more responsible. She had been thinking about the future and wanted to start a proper savings account. Could I help her with the initial deposit while she got back on her feet after a slow quarter for her design work? She had used the phrase "back on her feet," and I had thought nothing of it because Vivian had always been cautious with money, and the request seemed like growth, seemed like maturity arriving in the way it sometimes does, sideways, without announcement. I had transferred 215 million dong. She had added 5 million from her own account to round it up, and then she had declared the full 220 million as her personal gift to Derek's LLC. My money. Moved to her account under one story. Moved again to his LLC under another story. Documented in such a way that the chain, if anyone looked, showed only Vivian's signature and not mine. She knew, I said. Thomas did not answer immediately. He was not a man who rushed to fill silence. The declaration is in her handwriting, he said finally. Signed and notarized. She appeared in person at the notary's office. A pause. I cannot tell you what she understood at the time she signed it. I can only tell you what the document shows. I sat with that for a long moment. I had asked Thomas, in an earlier conversation, whether Vivian knew about the loan, about the LLC, about the transfer of the apartment. He had said he could not determine it from the documents. Absence from a document, he had said, does not establish absence of knowledge. She had not been absent from this document. She had signed it, in person, at a notary's office, with her name in her own handwriting, declaring money that came from my account to be her personal contribution to her husband's business. Whether she had understood the full design or only the piece she was shown that I could not know from a signature. I had known Vivian for 36 years. Since the moment she was placed in my arms in the delivery room, and I looked at her face, and felt the particular terror of loving something that completely. I had watched her learn to circle around things rather than name them directly. I had watched her defer to Derek in small ways that accumulated, over years, into habits of compliance that had their own momentum. I did not know, sitting in Thomas's office with the folder open between us, whether my daughter had been a participant or a tool. I was not sure she knew either. But the document existed. Her signature existed. The notarized declaration existed, buried in 61 pages of LLC annexures, in a filing that had been submitted on a Tuesday 11 months ago, while I was at the market buying dried mushrooms, and going about the ordinary business of a woman who did not yet know that two people she had spent her savings on were dismantling those savings one signed document at a time. There is one more thing, Thomas said. He turned to the last page in the folder. A printout, newer than the others, the ink still slightly raised on the paper the way fresh printing leaves it. I requested a complete financial history on the LLC, from the registries commercial division. It came through this morning. He set his finger on a line near the bottom of the page. The MinFat investment, the $870 million borrowed against your apartment, it was not a standard investment agreement. I looked at the line. It was structured as a non-recoverable contribution, Thomas said. Not a loan to MinFat. Not an equity purchase. A contribution. Under the terms of the agreement, if MinFat fails to deliver the project, the LLC receives nothing back. No legal recourse, no security interest in the development. The money is simply gone. I understood what he was not quite saying. He knew the money would not come back. Thomas looked at me steadily. The contribution structure is not what a legitimate investor uses. It's what someone uses when they want to move money out of an entity in a manner that is difficult to trace or recover. A pause. MinFat's principal director, the man under civil investigation for fraud in 2 other districts, I found a company registration from 2019, 2 years before the LLC was set up. Derek Nguyen is listed as a co-founder of that 2019 company. They have a prior business relationship going back at least 4 years before the LLC was registered. The clock on Thomas's wall made its small sound. The air conditioning moved the edge of the paper in the folder. Outside, the city went about its morning, unaware and indifferent, the way cities always are. Derek had not stumbled into a bad investment. He had moved borrowed money to a partner he had worked with for years, through a structure designed to make it unrecoverable, using an apartment that was not his, purchased with money that was mine, transferred using a document that had been altered after I signed it, funded at incorporation with savings my daughter had declared as her own. The plan had not been improvised. It had been built, piece by piece, over years, in the quiet spaces between dinners and Sunday visits and phone calls I had answered, without wondering what the call was actually for. I took off my reading glasses and placed them on the desk beside the folder. My hands were still. They had always been still when I needed them to be. 35 years of training does not leave you, but underneath the stillness, in the place where I kept the things I did not permit myself to show in professional rooms, something had broken open that was not going to close again easily. Not anger. Not yet. Something older and quieter than anger. The specific grief of understanding, all at once, the full distance between what you believed your life to be and what it had actually been, measured in documents and signatures, and a daughter's handwriting on a declaration she had carried to a notary's office on an ordinary Tuesday while I was somewhere believing we were fine. I picked up my glasses. I put them in my bag. File the petition, I said. Thomas nodded once and reached for his pen. I have prepared for difficult things my entire working life. Not in the way people mean when they say they are prepared to brace yourself. hold your breath kind of preparation that is really just hoping. I mean the other kind. The kind that begins weeks before the difficult thing arrives, in the small, deliberate actions that accumulate into readiness the way sediment accumulates into something solid. In the surgical recovery ward, we called it anticipatory care. You do not wait for the patient to deteriorate. You read the signs, you arrange what is needed, and you are already in motion before the crisis announces itself. I had been in motion for 11 days. The morning after Thomas's office, I woke at 4:30, as I always do, made tea, and sat at the kitchen table with a notebook I had bought the previous afternoon from the stationery shop near the market plain cover, narrow-ruled, the kind I had used for patient notes for 35 years. I wrote at the top of the first page the date and a single heading, what I have, what I need, what must happen in which order. Then I wrote for an hour without stopping. The list of what I had was longer than Derek knew, the original title deed. The original closing documents from September 2019, signed in 11 places, every page bearing my name and my identification number. Certified copies in 3 sets, one with Thomas, one in the safe deposit box at Vietcombank, one in the cabinet drawer beneath Min's plywood and the phone directories. The certified bank transfer records showing the full purchase amount moved from my personal account. The forensic document analysis Thomas had commissioned on the altered power of attorney, the report, 42 pages, concluded that page 2 of the submitted document contained text inconsistent in font spacing and ink density with the remainder, consistent with reprinting of a single page after original signing. Thomas had filed it with the land registry the morning after Derek came to my apartment. The registry examiner had flagged the title challenge as active. Derek could not sell the apartment. He could not refinance it. He could not move it in any direction, while the challenge was active, and the forensic report was on file. He did not know about the forensic report yet. He would find out when the registry examiner notified Hong and Associates of the new filing. Thomas estimated that notification would go out within the week. I wanted certain things to be in place before that notification arrived. The second item on my list was Mrs. Clara Din. Clara lived 2 floors below me on Tran Hung Dao Street, in the apartment she had occupied since 1989, 1 year before her retirement from 30 years of teaching secondary school literature in the district. She was 71, moved carefully since her hip replacement 2 years ago, and had a memory of precise and particular quality, the kind that retains not just events but the exact words people used, and the exact expression on their face when they used them. She had been my neighbor for 22 years. She had sat with me the week Min died and said almost nothing for 3 hours, which was exactly correct. I knocked on her door at 9 in the morning on a Wednesday. She opened it, looked at my face and said, "Come in, I'll put the kettle on." I told her what I needed. Not the full case. Clara did not need every document and filing to understand what was being asked of her. I explained that I had purchased an apartment for my daughter in 2019, that I had the original paperwork, and that there was a dispute about the property's ownership that would likely go before a registry examiner and possibly a court. I told her that on the evening of September 12, 2019, the day of the closing, she had been in the alley downstairs when I came home, and I had told her, briefly, that I had just completed the purchase. She remembered this because she had said, "You bought it outright?" And I had said yes, and she had said, "Your husband would be pleased." Clara wrapped both hands around her teacup and looked at me for a moment. "I remember," she said. "You were carrying a green folder." "Yes. And you said, 35 years of salary went into that folder." I had forgotten I said that. But she was right. That was exactly what I had said, standing in the alley with the folder under my arm and the receipt for the closing costs still in my coat pocket. "Will you be willing to provide a written statement?" I asked, confirming what you remember about that evening. Thomas Pham's office would prepare it. You would only need to review it and sign. "Of course," she said. She said it without hesitation, in the tone of a woman who has spent 30 years teaching young people the difference between what is right and what is convenient, and has never confused the two. "When?" "This week, if possible. I'm free Thursday afternoon." I called Thomas from the stairwell on my way back upstairs. He arranged the appointment for Thursday at 2 o'clock, and said he would have a draft statement ready. The third item on my list took more time. I had been thinking about Vivian's signature on the LLC declaration since the morning Thomas showed it to me. The notarized statement, 220 million dong declared as her personal gift, her handwriting, her name, her presence at a notary's office on a specific Tuesday. I did not know what Vivian had understood when she signed it. But I knew that Derek had presented her with a document and told her something about what it meant, and that the something he told her was not the truth. He had done this with me. He had done it with the power of attorney, with the building contact change, with the investment structure. The method was consistent. The presentation was always shaped to obtain a signature from someone who trusted him. Vivian had trusted him the way wives trust husbands. I had trusted him the way a mother trusts the man her daughter has chosen. Both of us had been reading a face he had designed for us to read. On Thursday afternoon, while Clara was at Thomas's office giving her statement, I went to see Vivian alone. She opened the door before I knocked. She had been watching for me, or watching for something. Her eyes carrying the particular exhaustion of a person who has been waiting for a specific moment to arrive and cannot rest until it does. "Mom," she said. "I know," I said. "I'm not here to accuse you." She stepped back and I came inside. The apartment was quiet. Derek was not there. She had told me in a brief message that morning that he had a client meeting until 6. We sat at the kitchen table, which was the same table she had brought from their previous flat, a narrow wooden one with 2 mismatched chairs, the kind of table that belongs to a life that is still being assembled. I asked her 3 questions. I asked them directly, without circling, because I was her mother, and because we had spent enough time not speaking directly about things. I asked whether she had known, when she signed the LLC declaration, that the money she declared came from my account. She looked at her hands. She said yes. I asked whether she had known, when she signed the power of attorney and brought it to my kitchen table, that it contained a clause extending authority to Derek. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said Derek had told her the clause was standard language. He said all such documents included it. He said I would never notice it. I asked whether she had known that the apartment had been transferred to Derek's LLC. She said she had known an LLC had been set up for tax purposes. She said Derek told her the apartment would still be in the family. She said she had believed him because she had not known, then, what she knew now. I looked at my daughter's face across the narrow table. She was 36 years old, and she looked younger in the bad way. Not young with possibility, but young with exposure. The way a person looks when the structure they built their understanding of the world on has been discovered to be something other than what they thought. I did not speak for a moment. The refrigerator made its small sound. Somewhere in the building, a door closed. "I need you to do one thing," I said. She looked up. "I need you to come with me on Monday morning." She asked where. I told her. I watched her face as I said it, the address, the time, what she would need to bring, what would happen when we got there. By the time I left her apartment and walked down to the street, the late afternoon light was coming in flat and golden off the buildings, the kind of light that makes the city look briefly like a painting of itself. I had the deed. I had the bank records. I had the forensic report. I had Clara's statement. I had Thomas. I had the registry appointment booked under my name for Monday morning at 9 o'clock. And now, for the first time in all of this, I had Vivian. Everything I needed was in place. The only question was whether Derek would figure out what Monday morning meant before Monday morning arrived. I walked to my car in the amber light and thought that he would not. But I had been wrong about him before, and I intended not to be wrong about anything again. The district land registry office opened at 8 o'clock on Monday morning. I arrived at 7:45. The building on Din Tien Hoang Street was a 4-story block with a tiled lobby and a reception counter staffed by 2 clerks who arrived, as government offices do, at precisely the appointed hour, and not a moment before. I sat in one of the plastic chairs along the left wall and waited. The chairs were orange, slightly mismatched, bolted together in rows of 4. The floor was pale granite that showed every footprint. A ceiling fan turned overhead at the slow pace of things that have been running for many years without being replaced. I had the tin box in my canvas bag. Thomas arrived at 5 minutes to 8 with his briefcase and Clara Din beside him. moving with the careful, deliberate pace of a woman who has decided that having a replaced hip will not prevent her from going where she intends to go. She wore a gray blouse and her good shoes, and she had done her hair properly, the way she always did when she considered an occasion significant. I stood when I saw them. She touched my arm once, briefly, and said nothing. That was enough. Vivian arrived at 8:03. She had come alone, as I had asked. She was wearing a dark green blouse I had not seen before, her hair pulled back, no jewelry. She looked like a woman who had not slept well and had made careful decisions about her appearance anyway. She sat down beside me without speaking. Her hands were folded in her lap. I did not reach for them, and she did not offer them. We sat beside each other in the orange plastic chairs, the way two people sit when they have agreed to be in the same place for the same purpose but have not yet decided what they are to each other. At 8:15, the registry examiner came to the waiting area and called the case reference number. Her name was Notary Officer Helen Bui. She was 50-something, with reading glasses on a chain around her neck and the settled, unsurprisable manner of a woman who had spent 20 years processing other people's property disputes and had seen most of what there was to see. She led us down a corridor to a consultation room with a rectangular table, 6 chairs, and a window that looked out onto the building's interior courtyard, a small square of sky, a potted ficus in the corner that was doing adequately. She asked us to be seated and placed her own folder on the table. Derek and his lawyer were already in the room. I had not expected that. Thomas had not mentioned it, which meant Thomas had not known. Derek must have received the registry's notification and moved quickly, instructing Hong and Associates to request the same appointment window. It was the right move, strategically. Appear in person. Control the room if possible. Arrive early. And take the chair that faces the door. He had taken the chair that faces the door. He looked at me when I came in, then at Vivian, and something moved across his face that he controlled in under a second. Not surprise, he was past the point of surprise. Something more like recalculation. He had not expected Vivian to be on my side of the table. His lawyer, a man I did not know, was already arranging papers with the efficient movements of someone who believed he was about to manage a straightforward proceeding. Officer Bui opened the session by stating the case reference, the parties present, and the nature of the challenge. A title dispute regarding Unit 7B, registered under a limited liability company, with a challenge filed by the named purchaser on the original deed of sale. She noted the forensic filing. She noted Clara's witness statement. She noted the suspension of further transactions pending review. Then she asked if all parties were present and prepared to proceed. Yes, Thomas said. Derek's lawyer said yes as well, and began immediately, the way lawyers begin when they believe momentum is on their side. He outlined the LLC registration, the power of attorney, the executed transfer. He used the word validly 3 times in the first 2 minutes. He placed a copy of the altered document on the table and referred to it as the authorizing instrument. Officer Bui looked at it. She did not touch it. Thomas spoke next. He was brief. He said the original power of attorney, the document his client had actually signed, had been forensically analyzed and found to differ materially from the document submitted to the registry. He placed the forensic report on the table, 42 pages. He placed the original power of attorney beside it, the one from my cabinet drawer, with no additional clause on page 2. He asked Officer Bui to note the difference. She read. She read carefully, her glasses on, her pen still, not performing attention but actually paying it. The room was quiet except for the sound of pages turning. Derek's lawyer said something to Derek in a low voice. Derek did not respond. He was watching Officer Bui's face. I was watching Derek's hands. They were flat on the table, controlled. He was still performing composure, even now. Then Thomas said, "If I may," and looked at me. I opened the canvas bag. I took the tin box out and set it on the table. The pale green metal. The small brass latch. The dent in the left corner. I opened the latch and removed the documents in the order I had placed them there the September evening. I came home from the closing in 2019. The original title deed first. Then the closing documents, all 11 signed pages. Then the certified bank transfer records, the full purchase amount, from my account, my name, my identification number, the 12th of September 2019. I laid them flat on the table, one beside the other, in the way you lay out instruments before a procedure. Precisely, without haste, each item in its correct position. Officer Bui looked at them. She looked at the title deed for a long time. Then she looked at the closing documents. Then the bank records. The purchaser of record, she said, and her voice was the neutral, factual voice of an official who is stating what is in front of her, is Margaret Lon Vo. Single purchaser. Purchase funded by direct bank transfer from account held by Margaret Lon Vo. She set her pen down. The original deed bears no secondary ownership notation. No joint tenancy? No co-purchaser? Derek's lawyer began to speak. She raised one hand slightly, not dismissively, just to indicate she had not finished. The forensic report identifies material inconsistency between the document submitted to this office and the original instrument. She looked at the altered power of attorney on the table, then at the original beside it. The additional clause appearing on page 2 of the submitted document is not present in the original. The ink density and font metrics are inconsistent with the remainder of the page. A pause. This office cannot uphold a transfer executed on the basis of a document that has been materially altered after signing. The room was very still. Derek's lawyer said that his client disputed the forensic analysis and wished to retain an independent examiner. Officer Bui said he was entitled to that, and that she would note it in the record. She said that in the meantime, the title challenge would be upheld, the transaction would be recorded as disputed, and no further encumbrance or transfer of the property would be processed until the dispute was formally resolved. She said this would be entered into the registry within 24 hours. It had taken Derek years to build what he had built. It had taken Officer Bui 11 minutes to suspend it. He looked at me then, directly. For the first time since I had come into the room, I had not looked away from him once since we sat down. I was looking at him now. He had sat in my living room and told me I was an elderly woman living alone. He had told me it was not a fight I could win. He had used those words in my own apartment, in front of my husband's photograph, and he had believed them because he had always read my silence as absence, my stillness as limitation, my patience as the patience of someone who has simply run out of options. I did not say anything to him now. I did not need to. I looked at him with the same expression I had given him in my living room the morning he came to tell me I could not win the slight, closed smile of a woman who had already moved the documents before he came looking, who had already filed the forensic report before he received notification, who had been 11 days ahead of him at every point, while appearing to be simply an elderly woman sitting quietly in her apartment, burning incense and repotting jasmine. Vivian was looking at her hands. Clara was looking at Derek. Thomas was capping his pen. I began to return the documents to the tin box, one at a time, in order. The same way I had removed them. The deed, the closing papers, the bank records. I closed the latch. Outside the window, the small courtyard square of sky was a clean, flat blue. The ficus in the corner was doing adequately. Somewhere in the building, a phone rang and was answered. I put the tin box back in my canvas bag. I was done. The independent examiner Derek's lawyer requested took 9 days to complete his analysis. I know because Thomas called me on the 9th day, at 11 in the morning, while I was at the kitchen table doing what I had done most mornings for the past 2 weeks, sitting with tea and the blue-inked account book, not because I needed to review the figures again, but because old habits of precision are their own kind of comfort, and I had always found steadiness in columns that added up correctly. The independent report came back, Thomas said. I waited. It confirms our findings. A pause, the kind Thomas used when he wanted the information to settle before he continued. The independent examiner found the same inconsistencies. Font spacing, ink density, marginal alignment on page 2, his conclusions match the original forensic report in every material point. Another pause. He noted, in his written conclusion, that the discrepancies were not consistent with scanning artifacts or document degradation. His language was careful, but the meaning was not ambiguous. He said it was altered, I said. He said the evidence was consistent with post-signing modification of the document. Yes. I set my pen down on the account book. Outside, The alley was going about its morning. The motorbike repairman would be at his post by now. The noodle vendor would have her coal cart arranged. The woman from the third floor would be hanging laundry on the line above the drain pipe. Everything ordinary, everything continuing. What happens now? I asked. Hoang and Associates has 48 hours to respond to the registry with a revised position, or the challenge is upheld by default. I expect them to respond. A brief pause. But Mrs. Vo, I've been contacted this morning by someone else. Not the registry, not the opposing counsel. His voice shifted, a careful quality entering it. I did not recognize the name for a moment. Then I did. The third-party partner, the man under civil investigation for fraud in 2 other districts. The man to whom Derek had transferred 60% of the LLC and sent 870 million dong in a non-recoverable contribution structure. His attorney reached out to you? I said. He wants to cooperate with the registry investigation. He is, apparently, in the process of settling the civil fraud cases in the other districts, and his attorney believes that demonstrating cooperation in related matters will reflect favorably on those proceedings. Thomas's tone was measured. He is prepared to provide a statement regarding the origin of the funds contributed to the LLC by Derek Nguyen. His position, according to his attorney, is that he understood the funds to be legitimately sourced and that he was not informed they were secured against property owned by a third party. I understood what this meant. Derek's partner was stepping away from the arrangement, not out of principle, out of calculation, the same calculation Derek had always used, the measuring of angles and outcomes, the selection of the position that cost the least. The difference was that this man's calculation had landed him on the opposite side of Derek's. He'll testify that Derek misrepresented the source of the funds, I said. That is what his attorney indicated, yes. I thought about the non-recoverable contribution structure, the arrangement designed to move money out of the LLC in a manner that was difficult to trace. Derek had built that structure to protect himself from accountability. He had not considered that the structure required his partner's continued loyalty, and that loyalty, in the kind of arrangement where everything is built on concealment, is always the most fragile component. Let him cooperate, I said. That afternoon, Thomas called again. Hoang and Associates had filed their response with the registry. The revised position was not what I had expected. They did not double down on the altered document. They did not request a third forensic examination. They submitted a letter acknowledging that questions had been raised regarding the power of attorney and requesting a 30-day extension to review the matter and consider their client's options. A 30-day extension was the language of a legal team that had looked at 2 forensic reports, a cooperating witness, and a registry examiner who had already suspended the transaction and had concluded that the case they had been paid to make was no longer a case. Thomas recommended we oppose the extension. The registry examiner denied it the following morning. 3 days later, Derek called Vivian. She told me about it that evening. She had come to my apartment for the first time since we sat together in the orange plastic chairs, and she sat across from me at the kitchen table with her hands around a cup of tea she did not drink and told me in the careful, level voice of a woman recounting something she has already processed alone what he had said. He had called to tell her that the situation had become complicated. He had used that word, complicated. He told her that some of the arrangements he had made regarding the apartment had been misunderstood, that the registry process was being handled by his lawyers, that she should not speak to my attorney or to me about any of it until he had sorted things out. He told her she needed to be on his side. He said the family needed to present a unified position. Vivian had listened until he finished. Then she had asked him one question. She asked whether the money she had declared on the LLC filing the 220 million she had signed her name to had come from my account. He had not answered immediately. In the silence before his answer, she told me, she had understood everything she had needed to understand. Not from the silence itself, but from the quality of it, the specific duration and texture of a silence that is not thinking but calculating, not remembering but selecting. She had heard that silence before, she said, in other conversations, on other subjects, and she had always interpreted it as him being careful and thoughtful. She had not recognized it then for what it was. She recognized it now. She told him she could not speak to him further without an attorney present. Then she ended the call. She looked at me across the table when she finished telling me this. Her tea had gone cold. The incense on the altar shelf had burned to ash. The apartment was quiet in the particular way of evenings when something that has been in motion for a long time has finally come to rest. "I signed documents I should not have signed," she said. "I knew some of it, and I told myself the parts I knew were small." She stopped. They weren't small. I looked at my daughter's face. 36 years old. The same face I had first seen in a delivery room. The same face that had learned to circle rather than confront, to defer rather than decide, to trust someone else's map of a situation rather than drawing her own. I had watched that learning happen over years and had not understood what it was costing her until now. "You'll need your own attorney," I said. "Separate from Thomas. Someone who can advise you specifically." She nodded. "I'll give you a name," I said. We sat for a while after that without speaking. It was not the silence of two people who have nothing to say. It was something different. The silence of two people who have said enough for one evening and are willing to sit in the same room anyway, which is its own kind of statement. The registry issued its formal ruling 4 days after the extension was denied. The transfer of Unit 7B to Derek's LLC was voided. The title was restored to its original recorded state. The property at Nguyen Thi Minh Khai Street, Unit 7B, was returned to the ownership of Margaret Lanveau, sole purchaser, as recorded in the original deed of the 12th of September 2019. Thomas sent me the confirmation by message and then called immediately after, so I could hear it in a voice rather than read it on a screen. I thanked him and ended the call. I went to the altar shelf and replaced the incense with a new stick and lit it. The smoke moved upward in its slow, thin thread. Min's photograph. The brass bowl. Like the tin box back on the lower shelf now, its proper position, the documents inside it returned to the place they had always belonged. I had been told, in my own home, by a man who had spent years measuring my silences for weaknesses, that I was an elderly woman who could not win. He had said it with the confidence of someone who has already decided what kind of person they are looking at. He had been looking, the whole time, at a retired head nurse who had spent 35 years reading situations that people had not yet understood were emergencies. He had seen an elderly woman. He had not seen the 35 years. The mortgage on the apartment remained, and the question of the 870 million dong remained, and the civil implications for Derek and his partner remained, and the slower, more difficult question of what Vivian had known, and when she had known it, and what accountability looked like between a mother and a daughter, all of that remained, unsettled, the way things that matter are always unsettled for longer than you want them to be. But the deed was mine. It had always been mine, and every document in every filing that had tried to say otherwise was now part of a registry record that said, in the permanent, public, time-stamped language of official things, that they had been wrong. The apartment on Nguyen Thi Minh Khai Street needed repainting. I noticed it the first morning I went back after the registry ruling the walls in the second bedroom had taken on the particular yellowish cast of a space where someone had lived without opening the windows enough, and the kitchen ceiling near the exhaust had a faint ring of discoloration that had not been there in 2019. Small things. The kind of things that accumulate when a space is occupied by people who are not paying attention to it the way an owner pays attention. I stood in the bedroom doorway with a cup of tea I had made in my own kitchen and brought over in a thermos, the way I always bring tea when I am going somewhere I expect to spend time, and I looked at the walls and made a list in my head. Repaint the bedroom. Clean the kitchen ceiling. Replace the bathroom faucet, which had developed a slow drip. Check the balcony drainage before the rainy season. None of it was urgent. All of it was mine to decide. That was the part I kept returning to, in the weeks after the ruling, not the victory, if that was even the right word for it, and I was not sure it was. A woman recovering what was already hers is not precisely winning something. She is simply arriving, finally, at the place she should have been all along. What I kept returning to was the texture of the decision-making, the particular quality of standing in a room and knowing that what happens to it is mine to determine. That I could repaint it yellow or leave it white or open the balcony door and let the jasmine smell come through from the pot I would bring from Tran Hung Dao Street. That no one would tell me I was too old for those decisions. He had said I was too old for paperwork. He had meant it as a closing argument, a door being shut in a particular face. What he had not understood, what he had never understood, Despite years of sitting in my living room and eating my food and accepting my money and watching my habits, was that a woman who has spent 35 years reading vital signs, managing wards, training younger nurses in the difference between what a chart says and what the patient in front of you is actually telling you, does not become less attentive with age. She becomes more precise. She has seen enough to know which details matter, and enough to stop wasting time on the ones that do not. The paperwork had always been mine. Every line of it. From the September closing in 2019 to the registry ruling that restored it. My name, my money, my tin box, my plywood drawer, my 35 years of blue ink accounting. He had tried to use my patience against me. He had read my stillness as weakness and my silence as emptiness, the way people always read those things when they have not earned the right to understand them. Still water, my mother said, runs deepest. She had said it as a warning to those who confused the surface with the whole. I had carried it my entire life through nursing school and 35 years of corridors, and the long quiet evenings after Min died, and the years of watching Vivian circle around things and the months of watching Derek build his arrangement piece by piece while I appeared to notice. Nothing. Still water. The depth is not visible from above. That is the point. I finished my tea and set the thermos on the kitchen counter and went out to the balcony. The city was doing its mid-morning business below motorbikes and delivery trucks, and the particular layered sound of a Vietnamese city at 10 o'clock, which is a sound I have heard my entire life and which means, simply, that the world is continuing. The flame trees on the street were in full color, the red petals bright against the white buildings, the way they always are in this season, reliable and excessive and beautiful in spite of themselves. Thomas had finalized the last of the civil filings the previous week. The mortgage on the apartment, Derek's second mortgage, the $870 million borrowed against what was not his to borrow against, was being contested through the courts as an unauthorized encumbrance on titled property. The lender had been notified. The process was slow, as property processes always are, but Thomas was not in a hurry, and neither was I. Slow and correct was preferable, in this as in most things, to fast and approximate. Derek had moved out of the Win Thi Min Kai Street apartment the week after the registry ruling. I did not ask where he went. I did not need to know. Vivian had retained her own attorney, a woman named Miss Phuong, whom I had not met but whose name Thomas had provided with a brief note, thorough, fair-minded, which was the closest Thomas came to enthusiasm in professional recommendations. Vivian and Miss Phuong were working through the implications of the LLC declaration, the signed statement, the chain of documents that bore Vivian's name. That process would take time and would be uncomfortable, and I could not make it less uncomfortable for her. Some things have to be walked through on your own feet. She had called me on a Sunday evening, 3 weeks after the registry ruling, not to discuss the legal proceedings, just to call. She asked about the apartment, whether I had been back, what needed doing. I told her about the bedroom walls and the kitchen ceiling and the bathroom faucet. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said she knew a painter who did good work, if I wanted a recommendation. I said yes. It was a small thing. A painter's name passed between a mother and a daughter on a Sunday evening. But small things, in my experience, are often where the real work of repair begins. Not in grand gestures or formal declarations, but in the ordinary extension of a practical offer. Here is someone who can help, if you want. I have been thinking about you and what you need. I am still here. We were not repaired. That would take longer than a phone call and possibly longer than I could calculate. But we were in the same direction, which was enough to begin with. I called Mrs. Clara Din that afternoon. She had asked, after the registry ruling, whether I would be keeping the apartment or selling it. I had told her I had not decided. She had nodded with the expression of a woman who understood that some decisions should not be rushed and had not pressed the point further. I had decided. I told Clara I was going to keep it. Not to live in. I had my apartment on Tran Hung Dao Street, my altar shelf, Min's photograph, the jasmine on the balcony. That was where I lived, but I was going to keep the Nguyen Thi Min Kai apartment properly, as a landlord keeps a property, with attention and correct maintenance, and a lease agreement drawn up by Thomas that said clearly whose name was on the deed. And eventually, when the time was right, when the legal proceedings had settled, when the dust had finished moving, I would sit down with Vivian and a different kind of paperwork, not a power of attorney, Not an LLC filing or a transfer document or anything that moved ownership from one column to another. Something simpler, a properly drawn estate document, reviewed by 2 attorneys and signed in my presence and understood completely by everyone in the room, that described what I intended and why, in language clear enough that no one would need to ask. That was the inheritance I was leaving. Not just the property, though the property was part of it. The inheritance was this: knowing where your documents are, keeping the originals, reading every page before you sign, trusting a stillness that has depth behind it, not emptiness. I went back inside and rinsed my thermos at the kitchen sink. The afternoon light was coming through the window now, the flat golden light of the season, making the ordinary kitchen look briefly like something that had been planned to look this way. I picked up my canvas bag from the counter. The tin box was inside it, the way it had been every time I left this apartment for the past several months, not from fear, not anymore, but from habit, the same habit that had made me keep it under the altar shelf in the first place. The deed and the closing documents and the bank records, folded along their creases, present and accounted for. I locked the door behind me and went down to the street. The flame trees were still going, extravagant and indifferent above the traffic. A woman on a motorbike passed with a child balanced behind her, both of them leaning into a turn with the particular ease of people who have done this 10,000 times. The city made it sound. I stood on the pavement for a moment with my canvas bag and my thermos and let the afternoon move around me. My mother had set it on the front step with her beans, with her hands moving in the old patient rhythm, meaning it as a warning, meaning it as a gift, meaning it as the truest thing she knew to pass on to a daughter who was paying attention. Still water, she said, runs deepest. I had never been empty. I had only been waiting for the right moment to let them find out how far down it goes. If anyone has ever looked at you and seen only your age, only your silence, only what they thought you had left to offer, this story is for you. The ones who kept their documents, who kept their patience, who kept their dignity even when the people they loved most had stopped keeping faith with them. You were never the problem. You were always the answer. If Margaret's story stayed with you, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel. There are more stories like this one, and every one of them deserves to be heard. We'd love to know, do you believe Margaret did the right thing by giving Vivian a second chance, or do you think some betrayals go too far to repair? Leave your thoughts in the comments below.